Pan Am Flight 845. On July 30th, 1971, a Pan Am Boeing 747 named Clipper America prepared for takeoff at San Francisco International Airport, bound for Tokyo. On board were 218 people, 199 passengers, and 19 crew members. What was supposed to be a routine departure quickly spiraled into one of the most bizarre accidents in early jumbo jet history. The crew had originally planned to depart on runway 28L, but last-minute changes forced them onto runway 01R. The problem? The runway was 1,000 feet shorter than they were told. Instead of the expected 9,500 feet, they actually had only 8,500 feet of usable runway. On a fully loaded 747 in 1971, those missing feet meant everything. As the aircraft thundered down the pavement, critical speed came late. The first officer called rotation at 160 knots, 184 miles per hour. But it was not enough. The jet plowed through the approach lighting system, with iron beams up to 17 feet long spearing into the cabin and injuring 2 passengers. The landing gear was torn apart. One side ripped completely loose and left dangling. Hydraulics, electrics, even the anti-skid systems were shredded. Yet somehow, the crew coaxed the crippled giant into the air. For nearly 1 hour and 42 minutes, the plane circled the Pacific, dumping fuel to lighten its load. Doctors on board treated the wounded, while the crew prepared for a landing no one was sure would succeed. When it touched back down on runway 28L, 6 tires blew out. One engine gave reverse thrust, and the jet veered off the pavement before coming to rest, nose up, tail resting on the ground. Miraculously, there were no fatalities, though 29 people were injured, including 8 with serious spinal damage from evacuation slides. The NTSB later blamed the accident on incorrect takeoff speeds and a cascade of communication failures. The aircraft itself survived, patched back together, and went flying for decades before ending its days in South Korea, at one point serving as a restaurant before being scrapped in 2010. United Airlines Flight 811. On the night of February 24, 1989, United Airlines Flight 811 lifted off from Honolulu with 337 passengers and 18 crew on board, heading for Auckland and eventually Sydney. 17 minutes after takeoff, while climbing through 22,000 feet, a thunderous thump shook the Boeing 747. Within seconds, the forward cargo door blew off the aircraft, ripping a hole in the fuselage. The pressure drop was instant and violent. 9 passengers were sucked out of their seats into the Pacific darkness. Chaos erupted inside the cabin. A flight attendant was nearly pulled out but clung to the stair rail, saved by passengers who dragged her back. Seats, luggage, and fragments of the aircraft itself spiraled into the night sky. The crew initially thought a bomb had gone off. After all, this was just 2 months after Pan Am 103 was destroyed over Lockerbie. The decompression crippled the jet. Debris smashed into engines 3 and 4, forcing the pilots to shut them down. The right wing stabilizers were badly damaged, and communication systems were failing. Yet Captain David Cornyn, a 59-year-old just weeks from retirement, and his crew fought to keep the giant under control. With 2 engines out, flaps stuck, and landing speed dangerously high, around 220 miles per hour, they brought the wounded jet back to Honolulu. Every surviving passenger was evacuated in under a minute. Incredibly, 346 people lived, though 38 were injured. The 9 lost were never recovered. The investigation revealed the real culprit wasn't a bomb, but a flawed cargo door design. Weak aluminum locks, faulty wiring, and ignored warnings had doomed those passengers. Boeing and Airlines were forced to replace the systems, but the changes only came after tragedy. Flight 811 became a chilling reminder that a small design flaw, left uncorrected, can rip open a jumbo jet at 23,000 feet and change hundreds of lives forever. Sky Lease Cargo Flight 404. In the early hours of November 7, 2018, Halifax's runway lights cut through the darkness as Sky Lease Cargo Flight 4854, a Boeing 747-412F, descended from Chicago. On board were 4 people, 3 crew and 1 off-duty captain. The giant freighter was empty of cargo, just repositioning for a long haul to China. Yet, within minutes, it would be reduced to wreckage in a grassy field. The approach to runway 14 looked routine until the crew noticed a tailwind. That meant the stopping distance would be tighter, but they pressed ahead without recalculating their performance numbers. Touchdown came at 5:06 a.m., but a critical error followed. Engine thrust on the left side was pushed beyond idle, which disengaged the auto brakes and retracted the spoilers. The jumbo jet lost vital deceleration just when it was needed most. The crosswinds forced the plane into a 4.5-degree crab angle, pulling it off the centerline. With focus locked on steering, callouts were missed. Manual braking didn't come until 8 seconds after touchdown, and maximum braking wasn't applied until 15 seconds later. By then, the 747 was only 800 feet from the runway's end. At 89 miles per hour, Flight 4854 thundered past the asphalt, skidding down an embankment. The nose gear collapsed, both body gears snapped, and engines 2 and 3 tore away from the wings. The wreck slid 544 feet past the runway into soft ground, stopping just short of a public road. 3 of the crew were injured, though all 4 survived. Investigators later pointed to pilot fatigue and poor decision-making as the root causes. Even worse, the crew had overlooked runway 23, a longer option that was still usable despite partial closure. The aircraft, worth tens of millions of dollars, was declared a total loss. Flight 4854 became a stark case of how small errors, compounded by exhaustion, can destroy a 747 in seconds. TWA Flight 800. On the evening of July 17, 1996, one of the most haunting tragedies in American aviation unfolded. TWA Flight 800, a Boeing 747-100 that had logged more than 93,303 flight hours, lifted off from JFK bound for Paris and Rome. Just 12 minutes later, the jet carrying 230 people exploded in midair and plunged into the Atlantic. It was the 3rd deadliest crash in U.S. history, and its fiery breakup set off a storm of theories and suspicion. Dozens of witnesses, 38 out of 258, swore they saw a streak of light shooting upward before the plane disintegrated. Was it a missile? A bomb? The FBI launched a sweeping criminal probe while the NTSB stuck to mechanical causes, creating an uneasy clash between investigators. The plot thickened when residue of RDX and PETN, both high-energy explosives, was discovered on the wreckage. Yet no blast marks, craters, or metal pitting consistent with a bomb were ever found. Investigators later suspected contamination from the massive recovery effort, which had involved military equipment. The real breakthrough came from an extraordinary feat: reconstructing over 95% of the jumbo jet from wreckage pulled off the ocean floor. The answer was hidden in the central wing fuel tank. At takeoff, it contained barely 50 gallons of fuel, enough to leave a cavern of highly flammable vapor. Directly beneath it sat the air conditioning packs, radiating heat upward. Add a faulty wiring system that had already drawn complaints from the captain just 2 minutes and 30 seconds before the blast, and the chain reaction was complete. After 4 years, in what became the most expensive aviation investigation in U.S. history, the cause was declared. A short circuit ignited fuel vapors in the center tank. The outcome was devastating, but the legacy reshaped aviation, forcing airlines worldwide to redesign fuel systems to prevent another airborne fireball. Korean Air Flight 801. On the rainy night of August 6, 1997, Korean Air Flight 801, a Boeing 747-300, approached Guam carrying 254 people on board. The flight was supposed to be routine, but the GlideScope instrument landing system was out of service, and Captain Park Young-shul, with nearly 9,000 flight hours, mistakenly believed it was active. His misjudgment, combined with poor communication in the cockpit, led the plane into Bijia Peak, just 3.5 miles short of the runway. In an instant, 229 lives were lost, making it the deadliest crash in U.S. territories and the 4th worst aviation disaster on American soil. Among the passengers were lawmakers, families, and even children, including 6 infants and toddlers. A few survived against unimaginable odds, like 11-year-old Rika Matsuda, who crawled out of burning wreckage after her mother urged her to escape. Another survivor, Hyun Seung-hong, recalled the crash was so sudden that there was no time to scream. Rescue efforts were chaotic. Fuel pipelines blocked access, jet fuel fires burned for hours, and confusion over jurisdiction between the U.S. Navy and civil authorities delayed critical aid. The National Transportation Safety Board later concluded the tragedy could have been prevented, not only by stronger challenges from the first officer and engineer, but also if air traffic control had monitored the flight more closely. Even the FAA's intentional disabling of Guam's minimum safe altitude warning system played a role. The aftermath reshaped aviation policy. A $70 million settlement was reached with families, Korean Air suspended Guam flights for over 4 years, and Congress passed the Foreign Air Carrier Family Support Act of 1997 to ensure equal treatment for families of victims on international carriers. Today, a black marble obelisk stands at the crash site, a stark reminder of how small errors, fatigue, and silence in the cockpit spiraled into one of the most haunting tragedies in modern aviation. MK Airlines Flight 1602. In the early morning of October 14, 2004, MK Airlines Flight 1602 lined up on Halifax's runway loaded with more than 117,000 pounds of lobster and fish bound for Spain. The aircraft was a Boeing 747-244B, a freighter with more than 80,000 flight hours on its frame, and commanded by Captain Michael Thornycroft, a veteran with 23,200 hours in the air. Alongside him were 6 crew members, including a relief captain, engineers, and a loadmaster. None would survive what came next. As the jumbo jet roared down the runway, something felt wrong. At 130 knots, rotation began, but the plane stayed stubbornly on the ground. A tail strike followed, sparks flying as the fuselage scraped the asphalt. With only 600 feet of runway left, the throttles were pushed to maximum, but it was too late. The 747 staggered into the air only 670 feet past the pavement, clipped an embankment, ripped apart, and erupted into flames. All 7 crew members were killed. The investigation revealed a chilling mistake. The crew had used incorrect performance data, calculating speeds and thrust from a previous lighter weight of 530,000 pounds, instead of the actual 778,000 pounds now on board. That error robbed the plane of the power it needed. Fatigue also played a role, as MK Airlines had no strict rules for maximum duty hours, leaving crews stretched thin across long-haul routes. The fiery crash required 60 to 80 firefighters and nearly 3 hours to bring under control. Families later received compensation, though the loss of life and aircraft worth tens of millions of dollars was irreparable. Flight 1602 became a stark lesson in how one overlooked number, combined with exhaustion, can turn a routine takeoff into a catastrophic end. Centurion Air Cargo Flight 164. In the early hours of July 7, 2008, Centurion Air Cargo Flight 164 lifted off from Bogota's El Dorado International Airport, heavy with a load of flowers bound for Miami. The aircraft was a 27-year-old Boeing 747-209B with 90,613 flight hours, powered by 4 Pratt & Whitney JT9D engines. On board were 8 crew members, all seasoned professionals. None of them could have known how quickly their routine departure would unravel. At 152 knots, rotation began. Just seconds later, engine number 4 surged and lost power, forcing the crew to declare an emergency. Before they could stabilize, engine number 1 also failed, leaving the 747 struggling to climb out of Bogota's high-altitude basin. With 2 engines gone and a third showing unstable surges, the jumbo jet simply could not stay aloft. The pilots tried to turn back, but the aircraft skimmed trees, clipped power lines, and at 3:57 a.m., slammed into a ranch house in Madrid, Colombia. Inside the house, Pedro Suarez, 50, and his 13-year-old son Edwin were killed instantly. Miraculously, all 8 crew members survived, though many were badly injured. 2 were rushed to the hospital in Madrid, while 6 others were treated in Bogota. Witnesses described sparks flying as the jet hit wires before plowing into the ground, scattering wreckage across farmland. The investigation revealed disturbing details. The high-pressure turbine in engine number 4 had been poorly fitted during maintenance months earlier, reducing its efficiency by nearly 6%. Meanwhile, engine number 1 suffered catastrophic low-pressure turbine failure, hurling metal through its exhaust. Even engine number 2 showed repeated surges seconds before impact. With 3 engines compromised, the crew never stood a chance. It was the second Kalita Air 747 accident in just 2 months, following a crash in Brussels. The losses highlighted cracks in oversight and maintenance, turning a routine flower run into a catastrophe that claimed lives on the ground and scarred Colombia's aviation history forever. TWA Air Flight 41. On the morning of December 20th, 1995, TWA Air Flight 41, a Boeing 747 packed with 468 people, lined up on a snow-covered runway at New York's JFK Airport for what should have been a short hop to Miami. Conditions were icy, and even before takeoff, the captain called it an ice rink out here. At 11:36 a.m., the giant jet was cleared for departure on runway 4L. Just seconds after power was set, the aircraft began sliding violently left. "Watch it! Watch it!" a crew member warned, as the captain fought with rudder and tiller controls. By 80 knots, about 92 miles per hour, directional control was gone. The captain hesitated, then rejected the takeoff, but it was too late. The 747 skidded off the runway at 11:37, barreling across taxiways, smashing 3 signs, and finally slamming into an FAA electrical transformer. The impact ripped off the number 4 engine and collapsed the nose gear. Overhead bins burst open, service carts flew loose, and chaos spread through the cabin. One cart struck a flight attendant, shattering her shoulder. In all, 25 people were injured, though every single passenger and crew member survived. The aircraft, a 24-year-old Boeing 747-136, was damaged beyond repair, marking the 25th hull loss of a 747. Investigators later blasted the captain for failing to reject the takeoff earlier and criticized TWA Air for weak training, poor management oversight, and inaccurate simulators that failed to prepare crews for icy runway scenarios. Even the airline's flight attendant training faltered. Only 3 attendants shouted the required brace commands during the emergency. The National Transportation Safety Board concluded the catastrophe was a mix of pilot error, slippery runway management, and systemic airline failings. TWA Air's reputation never recovered, and the airline itself disappeared just a few years later. Yet, Flight 41 remains one of the rare moments where a massive 747 accident ended with all lives saved. Proof that survival can come even when nearly everything goes wrong. Northwest Airlines Flight 74. On August 19, 2005, Northwest Airlines Flight 74, a Boeing 747-251B carrying 340 people, approached Guam after an uneventful journey from Tokyo. At 14:05 p.m., as the aircraft prepared to land, something went wrong. The captain called for gear down, but the cockpit soon filled with confusion. A warning horn blared, and the flight engineer noted a red gear light, a clear signal that one of the landing gears wasn't locked. Procedures demanded a confirmation of 5 green lights, but the crew never verified the actual count. Instead, vague statements like "all green" and "got 'em all" replaced the checklist's bold-faced instructions. The crew initiated a go-around, circling while troubleshooting. They reassured themselves that all gears were locked, though the nose gear had failed to deploy. By 4:15, cleared again to land on runway 6L, the massive jet touched down. For a brief moment, everything seemed normal. Reverse thrust engaged, engines roaring. The tower urgently radioed, "Negative, nose wheel." The front of the jumbo jet collapsed onto the runway at 14:18:51, scraping metal against concrete in a shower of sparks. Inside, chaos was narrowly contained. The captain informed passengers of the failure and ordered an evacuation after spotting smoke. Incredibly, despite the dramatic collapse, there were no fatalities. Only the aircraft, built in 1979 with over 95,270 flight hours logged, was lost, written off as a total hull loss. After a 3-year, 4-month investigation, the NTSB placed blame squarely on the flight crew. Their failure to confirm the gear indications as required led to the nose-first landing. It was a costly mistake that exposed lapses in cockpit discipline, communication, and checklist adherence. A jet worth tens of millions of dollars was destroyed. But 340 lives were spared, a stark reminder that small oversights in aviation can carry monumental consequences.